Hi, folks. A pleasure to see you again. Nice to be here. As always, I'm Jeff Gothelf. With me, as always, is my trusty co-pilot, Josh Seiden, taking the overnight leg of this flight as I sleep back in first class. Thank you, Josh. And with us today is a very special guest and longtime friend, collaborator, and so much more. Chantal Botana is here. Hi, Chantal.
Hey everyone, and guys, thanks for having me. I'm Chantal Botana. I'm a product coach and the founder of Product Evangelist Co. As I like to say, I help teams cut through the transformation drama and stop turning product discovery into theater. And I've worked with, Jeff and Josh for more than a decade, so I've had the privilege of learning alongside them, and it's really shaped how I coach teams to focus on outcomes that truly matter and move the needle.
Amazing. We're glad you're here today. We're talking about process. We talk a lot about process, actually. It's kind of its core thing for us. But one of the things I think that people don't recognize, at least not immediately, is this idea that process can be treated as a product. I recognize that gets a little repetitive and perhaps a little bit confusing, and hopefully we'll clear that up in the conversation today. But if it is a product, or if at least it can be treated as a product, like a thing that we're building, a thing that we're making, then we can improve it and we can iterate on it and we can treat it differently than I think we have been treating it up until this point. And so that's going to be the crux of our conversation today. I'm going to kick off and kind of explain what I mean when I say we can treat process as a product and apply the product operating model to it, and in sort of the hypothetical sense. And then Chantal is going to get specific about what that looks like in practice and maybe share some case studies. Here's an interesting thing about process, right? And by process, I mean anything like Agile, lean startup, design thinking, Scrum, SAFe, OKRs, product operating model itself, if we want to really get meta about it, right? Any kind of process, usually in our experience between the three of us, it gets treated as an output, right? It's a thing that we aspire to implement. And then once implemented, most organizations are then done with it, right? Hey, we implemented Agile. Okay. What changed? Well, we go by different team names now, and everyone's got a different job title. But other than that, what's changed, right? Hey, we've implemented lean startup or the product operating model. And then what? Right? And then what happened? And so in the same way that we ask that question, that so what question about the product or the feature or the system or the service that we just built, we can ask the same thing about the processes that we're implementing, right? And so the idea here is that a process can be a product, right? First and foremost, it actually solves a problem, right? We're implementing process because we're trying to make something better inside the organization itself, right? So, for example, we see these common concerns, right, from our bosses, right? Why does it take so long to get anything to market? Also, I want some AI now as well. Process solves a problem, right? At a certain point, we realize that the organization isn't working to the best of our intentions, whatever we tried to do, right? Why does it take so long to get anything to market? And also build me some more stuff and build it faster if you can. And of course, the team is saying, look, we're doing the best that we can. In fact, we're following the last process you told us to. We implemented this thing before, we implemented Agile, we had something else. And then after Agile, we had SAFe. And after SAFe, we have something else. And now we've got the product operating model, or whatever it is. But we are addressing actual problems with process in this particular case, right? The solution that we're using to solve the problem is a process in this particular case. If we're thinking about it as a product, then that product has customers. And by customers, we mean the people who consume the process, right? The people who are going to be using that way of working on a daily basis, right? So we've got our bosses and our stakeholders who are going to, at the very least, be operating within that or certainly receiving the output of that process. And then we've got all the teams, the team members that are working within that process itself. Engineers are the customers of the process. Product managers are the customers of the process, UX designers, marketing, et cetera, right? All these folks that have to operate within this new way of working. And then finally, your customers as well could also be consumers of that process, depending on how they participate in your ecosystem as well. Like I said, in most organizations, the definition of done for implementing a process has been, well, we implemented it, right? We're an agile shop now. We've implemented SAFe. We do design thinking. And for most organizations, that's enough. And then they're done and it's sort of operating those processes on an ongoing basis. But the reality is we need to see if that process actually solved the original problem. Because if it didn't, then we implemented the wrong process or we implemented it poorly or we didn't implement it fully, or we chose the wrong parts of it, or whatever it is. But just because we implemented it doesn't mean that we made things better. It doesn't mean that we solved the problem, which means we want to look for outcomes. Outcomes that tell us that not only did we choose the right process, but we implemented it in such a way that it works within our context, within our company, within our politics, within our industry, and that people's behaviors have changed in a positive way and that we're solving the original problem we set out to solve, right? So maybe the time from prioritized backlog item to production is reduced by 75%. Okay, right? Because remember, the original problem is why does it take so long to get something out to market? Maybe we want to be more customer centric, right? And so 75% of new initiatives have an outcome as a measure of success. We want to make sure that the work that we produce actually has customer value. And so 90% of the prioritized work, the work that's going to go from the backlog to production, has seen some kind of customer validation work. These are metrics, they're outcomes, they're measures of team behavior that tell us whether or not we've implemented the right process in a way that's actually effective, in a way that solves the problem and that improves things in the organization, whatever it is the problem that we set out to solve, right? And so we can absolutely think about ways of working or process as a product. And so I'm going to hand over to Chantal, and she's going to walk us through an actual specific example that's going to be a lot more helpful than my generic example to think through what does this actually look like in a real life situation.
And I think I'm actually going to start with a quote from Gandhi. He said, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." So
Yep.
if you want your teams to test and learn or sense and respond, then you should do it too. Starting off with the lean product canvas, let's just imagine that we're a health insurance company and that as the health insurance company, we've got a 3-year impact metrics, and two of which are 50% increase in profit margins, and then 186% increase in the employee NPS score. Imagine that there is a strategy. Someone has taken the time to thoughtfully figure out how we win and place some strategic bets. One is they've decided that one bet will be to transform the way we work to focus on outcomes over output. And the second one is they've decided to be one of the best places to work. So that feels like it ties naturally up to that, those higher level impact metrics that the board and the CEO and the stakeholders care about. So great. Now let's think about using the lean product canvas. If we were to write a problem statement, let's start off with, we exist to provide high quality, affordable healthcare and to improve the health of our members and communities. So we're starting to write a business problem. That's the first thing we want to do. That's only one piece of it. Now, what's the problem we're seeing? So if that's why we were created, that's why we're here, then what's the problem? We're siloed, we're slow, we're stuck in processes, and that makes it hard to meet customer needs. Well, what evidence do we have of that? It takes 6 to 12 months to release new features. Competitors are moving faster. Costs are rising. Regulations are getting tougher, and teams are frustrated by unclear priorities. Well, in order for these teams to put a dent in those impact metrics, they're going to take a look at them again. So that matches back to those impact metrics and those bets that we talked about earlier. We're going to actually go now to business outcomes. We've got an exercise that can help you all get to these outcomes and break things into leading indicators versus lagging indicators. But for right now, let's say that these are our 4 lagging indicators. So a 30% reduction in regrettable employee turnover. That means people you didn't want to leave the company have actually left. And a 75% increase in the number of new initiatives focused on outcomes. That's outcomes over outputs. A 30% increase in functions, so ops, marketing, customer support, reporting, probably self-reporting, improved collaboration with product. And then product teams report a 50% increase in employee happiness. So these are some of the business outcomes that, let's say, this transformation team is trying to go after. And then we move on to talk about our users. Say we've got product team members, customer facing team members, functional leaders, and operations team members. Those are our four target customers. And those are internal customers, by the way. So when I say a customer, it doesn't have to be an external customer. These are, for a transformation team, you would really be looking at internal customers with the hopes of achieving that strategy and long-term goals. Now, number four, some potential benefits for them could be more meaningful work that contributes to the strategy and the mission, fewer handoffs, less frustration, able to back ideas more confidently. And hey, everyone likes a bonus, so having their bonus actually paid out, right? Those are things that motivate those users. Now we get to the fun part. It's the solutions. So probably most teams start off with a whole bunch of ideas of, oh, well, we could do this and we could do that. And they actually probably just land on one after a considerable amount of research, and then they move it forward. But what we're proposing to do is actually come up with that list of ideas, but then test and learn your way through a handful of those ideas until you land on the right one, two, three, or four. There's no silver bullet. I doubt that one thing is going to work for everything. Maybe someone says, oh, let's reorg for flow. That's a classic from the team topologies. Let's try SAFe. Let's be an AI first company. Let's try OKRs. Well, what about the product operating model, POM? And or what if we just upskilled everyone in product and tech and maybe other parts of the organization as well? So now you've got a list of things that could work in a change management process, in a transformation. And we'll want to write hypotheses for each of those potential solutions, unless you've got something on that list that's so small that you feel like you can just ship it and see what happens. These are the bigger ideas that really, that really deserve some discovery. So taking a step back, applying more critical thinking to it. So let's choose one of these OKRs. So let's say we're going to do OKRs and we're going to actually write a hypothesis for that. I'm going to give you a little hack. You can actually just take or copy from each of these boxes. So business outcomes, users, user outcomes and benefits, and solutions. And that will create your hypothesis. So I've already said, okay, well, let's see if we can write a hypothesis for OKRs. We believe that a 75% increase in the number of new initiatives focused on outcomes will be achieved if product team members attain a more meaningful work that contributes to the strategy and the mission with OKRs. So the OKRs is the solution. So before going all in on that, you now have a working hypothesis that you can test and learn. Knowing that this is our hypothesis, think about that in terms of when teams use OKRs to connect their work to the mission and the strategy, they focus on outcomes, which means they'll be delivering more value to customers and greater impact for the business. Let's take that, and in box number 7, we start to write out all of our assumptions, like what would need to be true in order for this hypothesis to be validated. Box number 8 is about crafting your experiment, right? So for this hypothesis, let's say first and foremost, we wanted to know if the company strategy is clear. How would you experiment? So a couple of things we heard: send a survey, talk to your executive team, ask them to explain it, and then interview a variety of folks in the company, see whether or not anyone is able to articulate it and articulate it in the same way, and or if they send you links to something that exists that everyone can reference. I always like to say that it takes at least 7 times for something to sink in. Maybe it's just a question of the strategy being in people's heads, but it's just not written down somewhere and it hasn't been presented enough. But that could be a very quick test. I'm going to leave it at that. I hope this gives you a good overview of how you can leverage product discovery practice of looking at the problem, understanding what outcomes you're looking for, what changes in human behavior you'd like to see, who your target audience is, and convert those into personas. What are their jobs to be done? What are the potential solutions? And what hypotheses do you have for each of those solutions? And then what is your experimentation plan? And just one reminder, if it's something small and it's a quick win, you don't need to use this process for it. Just go ahead and do it and ship it, see what happens, and take a look at the metrics. But this is for those bigger things that could eat up a lot of time, a lot of budget, kill your opportunity costs. If it's a failure and you've wasted 6 months to a year, not going to look good for anybody. Maybe those bonuses aren't going to get paid. So I will leave it there.
Excellent. Chantal, great work. Thank you for sharing that example and making this clear. That's the idea in a nutshell, folks, right? This idea that, look, we've got problems to solve. We throw process at these problems because we think it's going to work, but actually we can test and learn our way to the right process, the right form of that process in the right context, and we can run experiments on it. And so with that, always great to see you folks. Thank you, Chantal. Thank you, Josh. We'll see you folks next time. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks for being here.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you all. Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody.